What drives people to cross the line? Is it love, lust, or something darker lurking beneath the surface? Join us as we unravel the chilling story of Ethan Howard, a man who had everything, but lost it all in a single blood-stained moment. How did a seemingly harmless night of passion turn into a crime that would haunt Oakwood Heights for years to come? Who's truly to blame, and who's the real victim? Stay tuned as we peel back the layers of this tragic story and uncover the web of betrayal, obsession, and guilt that tore a community apart. At the center of this shocking tale are two families, the Sandersons and the Howards, whose lives had been intertwined for years through neighborhood barbecues, PTA meetings, and shared carpools. Richard Sanderson, 52, was the picture of success in Oakwood Heights, a charismatic and driven real estate agent who had built a thriving business from the ground up, becoming one of the top sellers in the region. His professional achievements were matched only by his reputation as a devoted family man and active community member. Tall with salt and pepper hair and piercing eyes, Richard cut an imposing figure at neighborhood gatherings. He was known for his easy smile and quick wit, traits that served him well both in his career and social life. Despite approaching his mid-50s, Richard prided himself on staying fit, often seen jogging through the neighborhood in the early morning hours. Richard's wife, Emily, 50, was equally respected in the community. A pediatrician at the local hospital, she balanced her demanding career with an active role in various charitable organizations. Emily's warm demeanor and genuine concern for others made her a favorite among patients and neighbors alike. With her gentle, soothing voice and kind eyes, she was often described as having a calming presence. The pride and joy of the Sanderson family was their daughter, Isabel, 25, a rising star in the world of journalism. Isabel had recently landed a coveted position at a prestigious national newspaper. Her investigative pieces on local corruption had already garnered attention from larger publications, and many in Oakwood Heights predicted she was destined for greatness. Isabel had inherited her father's ambition and her mother's compassion, a combination that made her both driven and empathetic in her reporting. With her dark, wavy hair and striking features, she turned heads wherever she went, but it was her sharp intellect and quick wit that truly set her apart. The Sanderson family dynamic was one of mutual respect and support. Richard and Emily had always encouraged Isabel's independence and ambitions, even when it meant her moving away for college and later for her career. They maintained a close relationship through regular video calls and weekend visits. On the surface, the Sandersons appeared to be the perfect family, successful, attractive, and happy. Their home on Oakwood Avenue was often the gathering place for neighborhood events, with Richard manning the grill and Emily ensuring everyone felt welcome. Little did their neighbors know that beneath this picture-perfect exterior, Richard Sanderson was harboring desires that would soon threaten to tear apart not only his own family but another as well. The cracks in the Sanderson family's foundation were about to be exposed in the most devastating way possible. Just 3 houses down from the Sandersons on Oakwood Avenue resided the Howard family. Ethan Howard, 54, was a self-made man who had built his construction company from a one-man operation into one of the most successful firms in the county. Known for his attention to detail and unwavering work ethic, Ethan had earned the respect of both his employees and clients. With his rugged good looks, broad shoulders, and calloused hands, Ethan was the epitome of masculine charm. Despite his success, Ethan never forgot his roots, often volunteering his company's services for community projects and mentoring young people interested in the trades. Claire Howard, 51, was Ethan's steadfast partner in both life and business. As the company's chief financial officer, she managed the books with precision and foresight, allowing Ethan to focus on the hands-on aspects of the business. Claire's sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude were softened by her nurturing nature, making her a beloved figure among the company's employees and her neighbors. With her warm, expressive eyes, Claire had a classic beauty that had only grown more refined with age. She was known for her homemade pastries, a skill inherited from her French grandmother, which made the Howard home a popular stop during neighborhood bake sales. Sophie Howard, the 25-year-old daughter of Ethan and Claire, was a free spirit who had forged her own path in life. A talented graphic designer, Sophie had recently started her own boutique design agency specializing in branding for eco-friendly businesses. Her creativity and passion for environmental causes made her stand out in the conservative community of Oakwood Heights. Sophie's style and vibrant personality were a stark contrast to her parents' more traditional outlook. With her fiery red hair often adorned with colorful streaks and her penchant for vintage clothing, Sophie was impossible to miss. Despite their differences, the Howard family shared a strong bond, with Ethan and Claire supporting their daughter's entrepreneurial endeavors. Family dinners at the Howard household were lively affairs, filled with animated discussions about business, art, and politics. Ethan and Claire had raised Sophie to be independent and outspoken, traits that sometimes led to heated debates, but they always ended in laughter and mutual respect. The Howards were seen as pillars of the Oakwood Heights community, their success stories serving as an inspiration to many. However, the foundation of their seemingly perfect life was about to be shaken to its core, as desires and temptations would soon test the strength of their family bonds. The annual Oakwood Heights Summer Solstice Barbecue was a tradition that brought the entire neighborhood together, held in the sprawling backyard of the community center. It was an event that everyone looked forward to, a chance to catch up with old friends, welcome newcomers, and enjoy the first real days of summer. This year, the responsibility of organizing the event had fallen to Richard Sanderson and Ethan Howard. The two men had worked tirelessly to ensure everything was perfect, from the carefully curated playlist of summer hits to the selection of local craft beers on offer. As the sun began to set on that warm June evening, the air was filled with the tantalizing aroma of grilled meats and the sound of laughter. Children chased each other across the lawn while their parents mingled, plastic cups of wine or beer in hand. Richard stood at the grill, expertly flipping burgers and exchanging pleasantries with his neighbors. His eyes, however, kept drifting to a figure across the yard. Sophie Howard had arrived fashionably late, her entrance causing a small stir among the younger crowd. She wore a flowing sundress that accentuated her lithe figure, her hair cascading over her shoulders in loose waves. For a moment, Richard forgot the task at hand, mesmerized by Sophie's carefree laugh as she joined a group of her peers. It was only when the smell of burning meat reached his nostrils that he snapped back to reality, quickly salvaging the burgers before anyone noticed his lapse in attention. Across the yard, Ethan Howard was having a similar experience. He had been in the middle of a conversation with a group of local business owners when Isabel Sanderson approached, offering to refill their drinks. Ethan found himself stumbling over his words, suddenly acutely aware of Isabel's presence. She moved with grace and confidence, her dark hair catching the golden light of the setting sun. Isabel's intelligent eyes met Ethan's, and for a moment he felt as if she could see right through him. He quickly excused himself from the group, needing a moment to collect his thoughts. As the evening progressed, Richard and Ethan found themselves gravitating toward their friends' daughters. Casual conversations turned into deeper discussions, with Richard and Sophie bonding over their shared love of classic literature, while Ethan was captivated by Isabel's passionate accounts of her latest investigative piece. Emily and Claire, engrossed in their own conversations and duties as hostesses, remained oblivious to the growing attraction between their husbands and daughters. The two women had been friends for years, their bond strengthened by shared experiences and mutual respect. As the barbecue wound down and families began to head home, both Richard and Ethan felt a sense of excitement and guilt. They had discovered a connection with these younger women that they hadn't felt in years, a spark that both thrilled and terrified them. On the surface, the summer solstice barbecue had been a resounding success, bringing the community together for an evening of food and friendship. But beneath the veneer of neighborly camaraderie, the seeds of desire and betrayal had been sown. The events set in motion that evening would eventually lead to the unraveling of two families and shock the entire community of Oakwood Heights. In the weeks following the barbecue, both Richard and Ethan found themselves manufacturing reasons to cross paths with their newfound objects of desire. Richard began frequenting the trendy coffee shop where Sophie often worked on her design projects, while Ethan started taking a sudden interest in local journalism, often running into Isabel at the neighborhood cafe. These chance encounters quickly became the highlight of their days. Richard would feel his heart race every time he spotted Sophie's colorful hair through the coffee shop window. He'd casually stroll in, pretending to be surprised to see her there. Their conversations would flow effortlessly, covering everything from obscure poets to the latest environmental initiatives in the area. Ethan, for his part, found himself captivated by Isabel's passion for uncovering the truth. He'd listen intently as she spoke about her latest investigations, offering insights from his years of experience in the local business community. Isabel appreciated his perspective, and Ethan basked in the glow of her admiration. Both men struggled internally with their growing feelings. Richard would lie awake at night, guilt gnawing at him as Emily slept peacefully beside him. He tried to rationalize his attraction to Sophie as a harmless midlife crisis, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Ethan found himself becoming distracted at work, his thoughts drifting to Isabel when he should have been focusing on blueprints and contracts. He began to question his marriage, wondering if he and Claire had lost the spark that Isabel had reignited in him. The clandestine nature of these meetings only added to their allure. There were close calls like when Claire almost walked in on Ethan and Isabel deep in conversation at the cafe, or when Sophie's friend nearly caught her and Richard sharing an intimate moment over a discussion of Dostoevsky. As summer progressed, the tension continued to build. Stolen glances at neighborhood gatherings, lingering touches that lasted just a moment too long, and the thrill of secret text messages exchanged late at night all served to fuel the growing infatuation. Both Richard and Ethan knew they were treading on dangerous ground. They were risking their marriages. Their friendships and their standing in the community were at stake, yet the pull of these forbidden desires seemed to override all logic and morality. Little did they know that their separate infatuations were about to collide in a way that would change all of their lives forever. It was a humid August evening when everything changed. Richard Sanderson and Ethan Howard had met at their favorite local pub, ostensibly to discuss plans for the upcoming neighborhood watch meeting. But as they nursed their beers, an uncomfortable tension hung in the air between them. Richard and Ethan met for drinks, initially engaging in awkward small talk. Eventually, Richard gathered his courage to broach a sensitive topic. With hesitation, he confessed to having developed feelings for Ethan's daughter, Sophie. He expressed his inner turmoil and guilt over these emotions. To Richard's surprise, Ethan's reaction was not one of anger but of understanding. After a moment of contemplation, Ethan made a startling admission of his own. He had been experiencing similar feelings towards Richard's daughter, Isabel. This mutual revelation led to an hour-long heart-to-heart conversation. The two men shared their struggles with these forbidden attractions and the guilt that had been weighing on them. As the evening progressed and they continued drinking, their discussion took an unexpected turn. Richard, his inhibitions lowered by alcohol, proposed a controversial idea. He suggested they could explore their feelings just once by switching partners for a night, without any long-term commitments. He argued that this might allow them to move past these internal conflicts. Ethan was initially taken aback by the suggestion, understanding the moral implications and the potential fallout. However, as Richard explained how they could carefully organize the situation, Ethan found himself reluctantly considering it, despite knowing better. They convinced themselves it could work just a one-time indulgence, a way to satisfy their curiosity and desires without bringing permanent damage to their families. They reasoned that it might even benefit their marriages in the long term, allowing them to move beyond these inappropriate feelings. As last call was announced, Richard and Ethan shook hands, sealing their arrangement. They would approach Isabel and Sophie separately, test the waters, and ensure everything was consensual. They set a date 2 weeks from that night and laid out the plan in detail. Walking home that night, both men felt a mixture of excitement and unease. They had crossed a line and deep down they knew there would be no going back. But the temptation of fulfilling these hidden desires, even just for one night, outweighed any doubts that lingered. Little did they know that their seemingly harmless plan would soon spiral out of control, bringing consequences far more devastating than either could have anticipated. Richard and Ethan faced the challenging task of approaching their daughters with such a delicate proposition. Both men spent considerable time contemplating how to start the conversation, knowing the potential risks involved. Richard chose to speak with Isabel over lunch at a quiet bistro. As they sat in a secluded corner, his nervousness was evident. Isabel, noticing her father's strange behavior, asked why he seemed so on edge. Gathering his courage, Richard explained the situation, revealing Ethan's feelings towards her and outlining their plan. Isabel was initially shocked and torn. Part of her was unsettled by the idea, while another part was strangely curious. After a long silence, she asked for time to think it over. Meanwhile, Ethan met with Sophie in a nearby park for a private chat. As they walked along a secluded path, he struggled to explain what was on his mind, his usual confidence waning. Sophie listened with a mix of disbelief and intrigue, acknowledging to herself that she had always found Richard fascinating in a way she knew was improper. She shared her initial reaction, admitting that while the idea was unconventional, there was something about it that intrigued her. Both daughters requested time to consider the proposal. Over the next few days, both Isabel and Sophie grappled with the decision. They reached out to each other to confirm that the conversations had in fact happened. Together, they discussed their mixed emotions, fears, and what the consequences could be. Ultimately, curiosity and attraction won over caution. Convincing themselves that they could manage a one-time encounter without letting emotions take over, both women gave their consent a week after the initial talks. This decision set the stage for an evening that would change all their lives forever. The night arrived with a sense of surreal anticipation. Richard had arranged 2 rooms at a luxurious hotel in a nearby city, ensuring privacy for everyone involved. The plan was simple. Richard would meet Sophie in one room, while Ethan and Isabel would be in the other. Emily and Claire, completely unaware of the impending betrayal, believed their husbands were away at a regional business conference. Isabel and Sophie had also made excuses for being out on a girls' night out in the city. As dusk settled in, 2 cars pulled into the hotel parking lot, each arriving from a different direction to avoid raising any suspicions. Hass's heart pounded as he watched Sophie step out of her vintage Volkswagen, looking breathtaking in a flowing bohemian dress across the lot. Ethan felt a similar rush as Isabel emerged from her sedan, elegant in a sleek black outfit. The 4 met briefly in the hotel lobby, the air thick with tension and unspoken desires. They exchanged awkward glances, the reality of what they were about to do finally sinking in. With a nod, they separated, each couple heading to their designated room. In room 512, Richard and Sophie stood facing each other, the silence broken only by the sound of their nervous breathing. Richard reached out his hand, trembling slightly as he tucked a strand of Sophie's colorful hair behind her ear. The simple touch seemed to break the spell, and suddenly they were in each other's arms, years of pent-up desire spilling over. Meanwhile, in room 514, Ethan and Isabel were having a different experience. The initial awkwardness gave way to a deep conversation. Isabel, ever the intellectual, found herself fascinated by Ethan's life stories. Ethan, in turn, was captivated by Isabel's intelligence and insight. As the night wore on, their physical encounter became almost secondary to the intense emotional connection they were forming. Hours passed, filled with passion, conversation, and moments of quiet reflection. As dawn broke, the reality of what they had done began to settle in. Richard lay awake, watching Sophie sleep. He felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction, guilt, and an unexpected emptiness. He had thought this encounter would quench his desire, but instead he found himself wanting more. In the other room, Ethan and Isabel were still talking, their voices low and intimate. Ethan felt as if he had known Isabel his entire life, and the thought of this being a one-time thing suddenly seemed unbearable. As morning fully arrived, the 4 reconvened in the hotel lobby. The atmosphere was charged with unspoken feelings and the weight of their actions. Sophie, looking slightly disheveled but glowing, gave Richard a small smile before turning to leave. Isabel and Ethan shared a lingering look, reluctant to part. The drive back to Oakwood Heights was filled with silent reflection for all involved. They had crossed a line, and deep down, each of them knew that things would never be the same. Richard found himself already planning ways to see Sophie again, his obsession growing rather than diminishing. Ethan was lost in thoughts of Isabel, replaying their conversations and feeling a connection he hadn't experienced in years. Isabel felt a mixture of guilt and exhilaration, her analytical mind already dissecting the experience and its potential ramifications. Sophie, for her part, felt a sense of closure, having satisfied her curiosity about Richard, but ready to move on. As they returned to their normal lives, outwardly pretending nothing had changed, the seeds of disaster had been planted. What was meant to be a single night of indiscretion had set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. In the days and weeks following that fateful night at the hotel, the facade of normality in Oakwood Heights began to crack. What was intended to be a one-time encounter to satisfy curiosity and desire had instead opened a Pandora's box of complications and intensified emotions. Richard found himself consumed by thoughts of Sophie. What had started as a physical attraction had blossomed into a full-blown infatuation. He began manufacturing reasons to be near her, showing up at her favorite cafes and even driving by her apartment under the guise of checking on properties in the area. His work began to suffer as he spent hours daydreaming about their night together and imagining a future with her. Emily noticed the change in her husband's behavior, his distraction, his sudden interest in Sophie's social media profiles, the way his eyes would light up at the mention of her name. All of these signs pointed to something being amiss. However, she pushed her suspicions aside, not wanting to believe that Richard could betray her in such a way. Ethan, on the other hand, was grappling with a different kind of aftermath. His encounter with Isabel had left him feeling guilty and conflicted. While he was undeniably drawn to her intelligence and passion, he also felt a deep shame for betraying Claire and complicating his relationship with the Sanderson family. Ethan threw himself into his work, trying to bury his feelings under a mountain of contracts and construction plans. Claire sensed the change in her husband. His sudden long hours at work and his distracted demeanor at home led her to wonder if the pressure of running the business was finally getting to him. She tried to be supportive, unaware of the true source of his distress. Isabel found herself in a state of emotional turmoil. The night with Ethan had awakened feelings she hadn't expected. She admired his strength, his wisdom, and the way he truly listened to her. These feelings conflicted with her guilt over betraying her mother and her own moral code. She buried herself in her work, taking on more investigative pieces than ever before, trying to distract herself from the emotional whirlwind. Sophie, surprisingly, seemed the least affected by the encounter. While she had enjoyed her night with Richard, she viewed it as a one-time experience, a chapter closed. However, she couldn't help but notice Richard's increased presence in her life and found herself growing uncomfortable with his attention. The situation between Richard and Ethan deteriorated in the weeks following their arrangement. Richard's pursuit of Sophie became increasingly obvious, causing discomfort and raising suspicions in their community. Ethan, who had adhered to their agreement, grew angry and jealous at Richard's continued interest in his daughter. Their once friendly relationship soured, with interactions becoming strained and hostile. The peaceful community of Oakwood Heights was on the brink of upheaval as the consequences of their indiscretion threatened to unravel their lives. The tension culminated on an autumn evening when Ethan confronted Richard at his home. Their argument quickly escalated, with both men hurling accusations and insults. The confrontation turned physical, with Ethan shoving Richard and Richard retaliating by swinging his whiskey glass. The altercation spiraled out of control, resulting in a violent struggle on Richard's front lawn. In the heat of the moment, Ethan struck Richard with a rock, causing a fatal injury. Realizing the gravity of his actions, a horrified Ethan fled the scene as sirens approached in the distance. This tragic turn of events, stemming from jealousy and betrayal, was set to shock the quiet neighborhood of Oakwood Heights and irrevocably change the lives of all involved. The discovery of Richard Sanderson's body on his front lawn sent shockwaves through Oakwood Heights. Police swarmed the quiet suburban street, their flashing lights illuminating the faces of shocked neighbors who had gathered to witness the unfolding tragedy. Detective Amelia Hartley, a seasoned investigator with the county police, took charge of the case. Her keen eye immediately noted the signs of a struggle: the broken porch railing, the shattered whiskey glass, and most damning of all, the blood-stained rock lying near Richard's body. As dawn broke, the Sanderson home became a hive of activity. Forensic teams combed the area for evidence, while Detective Hartley began the grim task of interviewing the family. Emily Sanderson was inconsolable, unable to comprehend how her seemingly perfect life had been shattered overnight. Isabel, pale and shocked, provided what little information she could, her journalistic instincts temporarily numbed by grief. Across town, Claire Howard woke to find Ethan missing. His truck was gone, and he wasn't answering his phone. As news of Richard's death spread, a sick feeling of dread settled in her stomach. Sophie, hearing of the tragedy, was overcome with guilt. She couldn't help but feel that her actions had somehow led to this horrific outcome. As Detective Hartley pieced together the events of the night, a picture began to emerge of a community hiding dark secrets beneath its pristine exterior. The investigation would uncover the tangled web of desires and betrayals that had led to this moment, leaving no one in Oakwood Heights untouched by the scandal. The trial of Ethan Howard was a spectacle that gripped the community. The courtroom was packed with curious onlookers and devastated family members as the sordid details of the affair and the fateful confrontation were laid bare. The once respected businessman sat silently, a shell of his former self. Despite his lawyer's best efforts to argue for manslaughter, citing the heat of the moment and Ethan's previously unblemished record, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, taking into account the circumstances and Ethan's eventual surrender to authorities, sentenced him to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. As Ethan was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom erupted in a cacophony of sobs and murmurs. Claire Howard, stoic throughout. The trial finally broke down in tears as she watched her husband taken away. Sophie, her face ashen, slipped out of the courtroom, unable to bear the weight of her guilt any longer. In the months that followed, Oakwood Heights struggled to return to normalcy, though the scars of that night would linger for years to come. Emily Sanderson, after an extended period of mourning, sold the family home and moved to a different state, hoping to leave the painful memories behind. Isabel, now forever linked to the tragedy in the eyes of the public, found her career as a journalist tainted by the scandal. Sophie, haunted by her role in the affair, left the community altogether. She traveled for a time, searching for peace and a way to atone for her actions. Though she would eventually find some semblance of closure, the events of that fateful night would forever be a shadow over her life. As for Ethan, he spent his days in prison reflecting on his actions. The weight of his guilt was compounded by the knowledge that he had destroyed not only his own life, but the lives of those he cared about. His love for Sophie had driven him to madness, and now he would pay the price for his actions for years to come.